Today I'm doing a tutorial on how to paint a tulip in gouache, and I'm using some tubes from the Arteza 60 gouache color set. I'll be using lemon yellow, sap green, vermilion red, sky blue, noir, which is black, and titanium white. The brush I'm using is a size 12 etcher gouache brush. For the paper, I'm using Hahnemuhle's hot pressed. It's from their collection line, 140 pounds. I cut down to size. Actually, this was a size that I happened to have from another project. So I recommend, this is I think approximately 5 by 6. It doesn't have to be that exact size. I wouldn't go too large if this is your first gouache. Keep it simple for yourself. I'm also using, this is a Kit's Inventive Artist Smart Paint Palette. It's a non-stick kind of rubber thing. Cleans up very easily. I won't say it's non-staining, but it doesn't stain easily. Has a lid. Couldn't dump it upside down, doesn't fit that close, but it's nice if you're out and about doing things. Also using, this came with my art tool kit. It's just a syringe for picking up water for mixing. I don't do a whole lot of that, but I do a little bit. And then I just have a cocktail knife that I'm going to use to mix the water and the paint together. I don't like mixing with a brush because it's too easy to get the paint up in the ferrule, which can ruin the brush, and it's also harder to gauge how much paint you've mixed, what the color really is. You can get stuff hidden within the brush itself. I use 2 glasses of water. I usually forget and stick the brush in the wrong one, but the idea is that I'll rinse off the color in one and then can use fresh water to pick up new water. This drawing is also at Doodles, so you can see it a little better because I did it in pen. As you can see from what I'm doing here, I only just do the flower. I went ahead and I drew the different areas because when I'm trying to film and paint at the same time, you know, it's kind of the walking chewing gum. It's a lot more harder for me to remember what I'm doing, so I drew a little bit more than I normally would. But the background should be pretty fluid. You don't want to get stuck trying to make it exactly like I have in my painting. It doesn't need to be. Alright, now I'll try and stay in camera range and hopefully the camera will not turn off. Now some of the gotchas about gouache, when you open it, gouache likes to flake when it dries. Okay, now I didn't get that time, but lots of times you get all sorts of little flakes. You don't want to get those in the paint you're going to use because sometimes they don't mix too well. So you hold your paint over a paper towel, and in fact you might wrap the towel around the cap so that you catch any flakes that are out there. And squeeze a little bit. I'm going to put more white there because I tend to grab the white and mix it. We'll be mixing it a lot with the other colors. I'm not going to put the black out yet because I won't use it until almost the last. Okay, let's see. I'll put the yellow over here. Won't use as much of that. And put out the vermilion. I use quite a bit of that. Now I was painting with these last night, so none of them flaked because I'd already gotten all the flakes out of them. Definitely something to watch out for though. Now you can see a little bit there that was in the cap. Some of the flakes that were, I don't know if you can see it there on the towel or not. I won't squeeze out the blue or the black for now because I won't use a whole lot and I won't use it until almost the end. I'm actually sticking my palette knife in the water because I want to pick up some, but I don't want a horrendous amount. And I'm just going to take it and mix up the gouache a little bit. When you use the gouache, this first layer you put down, it isn't quite as important, but generally speaking, when you're spreading your gouache, it should be kind of like frosting a cake. You don't want a whole lot of the brush marks, but there should be some thickness to it. It's not, you don't, at least for what I'm doing here, you do not want something quite as thick as, or thin as you would do with watercolor. It's one of the main differences between watercolor and, or traditional watercolor and gouache. I'm going to, okay, just start putting some of this yellow down, and I'm mostly using the side of the brush, kind of put down the tip and then lay down to the side. I don't go all the way down, but I'm picking it up. I'm twirling that brush a little bit, mainly to get the paint on all sides of the brush. Now, the thing with gouache that you don't have with watercolor is that you can paint over it later. You will lift color if you're not careful, but it's pretty easy to paint over. So if you don't like what you get, think you made a mistake, or you just didn't do what you thought it would, it's really easy to just let it dry and paint over it. So you've kind of got that freedom there to try things that you might not do otherwise. And I'm going to go ahead now and put some yellow down here in the background. And I'm being fairly free. I'm starting with the places where I will have the globes of light, and not trying to make them the right size or anything. I'm just putting some yellow down because I'll paint over a good portion of this. Yeah, we'll just put some other, I'll be mixing. I'll be doing some mixing of paint on the paper, and for that I'll need to have the paint still be wet. I'll be adding, in essence, wet paint to wet paint. I'll also do some dry brushing. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I start doing it. Yeah, now I use the one water to wash off that brush. And then I'll pick up some fresh water. What I'm going to use now is the red. And I'm doing the same thing again. It's just dipping my mixing knife in with some water. Don't want a whole lot, and a brush would pick up a whole lot more. So this just gives me enough to kind of get any stiffness out of this gouache, make it easy to spread. You wouldn't necessarily always want to do this, or you might want more water, just depending on what your technique is. But I want it to be pretty thick. When you start getting like to edges, make sure you have a generous amount of whatever color it is you're using, because then you will get smoother, more even edges. We will end up painting over a good portion of this. When you start seeing those little pebbly things like you're dry brushing, that should clue you that's dry brushing, which means that your brush is running a little dry, or you need to turn it onto another side to get more paint. I'm going to add a little bit more water to this. Now I have too much water, but that's okay. Especially, like I say, this first layer. A little low. I'm going to go ahead and do a little dry brushing here. This is kind of what they call a bokeh effect, and I'll be working with these as we go along. But I'm always going to leave a little bit of the center. I'll probably come back and put a little more yellow. But take advantage of the fact that the paint was running low on the brush. Because at this point I don't want to pick the color up on any of this or necessarily blend it in. I'm going to let it dry for at least 10 minutes. Alright, now we've let that dry. You can use the back of your nails as the best way to see if there's any dampness. If it feels cool, even though it's dry to the touch, that could mean that it's still a little damp. And touching it this way leaves oil, so you could potentially have spots where the paint won't go down. And so back of your nail is a much better way to test. Actually, yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do now is make an orange, and just going to grab a little red. Going to go ahead and contaminate my yellow. I don't tend to mix really well when I do this, so in essence, by going ahead and coming over here and contaminating, as it were, I'm creating a second yellow that I'll have, or orange I should say. So then I'm just going to come up here, and that's still pretty close. Darker colors it's really hard to get a lighter color when you have too much. That's still pretty dark orange, but I'm going to go ahead and use it because it does make it just a little bit lighter. Now over here, you can see I had that little bit in there. This is going to make a much lighter orange, and I can dip into this orange. Okay. And I went right back into that while it's still a little wet because I want to do a little bit of blending on the paper. I'm going to pick up a little bit more yellow here. I'm sort of creating lighter oranges on the fly. Pick up a little bit more yellow and drag it up into the orange I have up there. And if you're not getting, I decide I want it to be a little bit more yellow yet, remember to look at what you actually have on your brush and where it's at, because if you pick up all your paint on one side of the brush and then you paint with the other, you're not going to get as much color. Now I'm going to take that lighter orange. I'm going to be a little careful here and keep this color sort of on the inside. If I mix this orange, because there's more red in this, and I mix it with the green too much, it's going to start getting a little muddy. I'm just going to put a little bit of a warm glow. And again, go ahead and do this without fear, because if you find out that you are getting mud, let it dry and paint over it. That's just the wonderful thing about gouache. Okay, clean my brush again. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my knife. So I'm going to take some of my white and put it over here in the green. I'll be actually adding some more yellow to this later, but I'm still going to get right up close and just overlap that yellow that's there, because I don't want to leave any unnatural looking lines. There's just something about when you get that outline that it just draws the eye. And what I'm in essence doing here is doing some mixing right on the paper. White over the dried green, and then I'm adding some yellow. It's going to be a very pale yellow because that white is already down there. I've wet my brush. Back there. And I've got quite a bit of water in the brush, because what I'm going to do now, I'm just picking up a little bit of the yellow, is I'm blending a little bit of this yellow out, and I want it to be like a really light glaze. When that dries, it will hardly be there, but it will make just that little bit of difference, and it kind of blends these lights into the background a little bit more. Now a little bit thicker here. I'm gonna work that white in there just a little bit, making little strokes along the outside there, sort of radiating some energy there. Now I'm going to let this dry for a bit. Another good reason to let it dry in between, besides making it so that the paint doesn't pick up as easily, is the fact that, like most water mediums, gouache will change color a bit when it dries. Now this didn't change color too much, but looking at it I can see that I want to go back to a little bit more of the red. It's a little, yeah, the reason I want to do that is because it will give me a more dramatic effect once I add a darker background. And this is also going to give me that kind of layered look. This time I'm not blending, I'm doing hard edges, or creating hard edges. It's hard to speak and paint at the same time. I just don't have the brain power for it. Doing a little dry brushing down here. I don't have as much paint on my brush, and I'm very lightly stroking so that I kind of get that striped effect rather than a real solid. It's hard edges. Clean it off. Take some black now and open it up. I'm going to load up the brush with a little bit more water than I've been using. I'm just going to put straight black on here, but I want it to pick up some of the green so that it turns out sort of a greenish black. And this is because I have more water. This is really glowing, and it looks really dark, but when it dries it will be a little bit lighter. I may have to go in and make it lighter yet, but I already know that it's going to dry lighter. Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of negative painting here, and that I'm going to make these kind of look vaguely like leaf shapes. While that dries, I'm going to put a little bit, make that whiter. And I'm going to add a little bit more green. I don't want the full dark green. I'm going to just pull a little bit of this white here off here and make it a little bit darker yet. I don't want to totally cover up the white, the lighter green that I had there before. Got a little bit more yellow. Watery yellow. I'm going to just be doing more of a glaze to kind of blend. Using the lower portion of the brush kind of on the side, and I'm kind of going a little bit on one side of the brush, and then in one direction, then I flip to the other side of the brush, and then I go half around on that side, and I go half around on this side. I'm going all the way around, but creating these brush marks, kind of giving the feeling of energy. Now I don't have too much paint on my brush. This is more dry brushing at the moment than what I was doing here. We're blending wet with wet. Pick up a little bit more yellow. Okay, now I'm gonna pick up as much of that yellow as I can, and go over here and pick up a little bit of the green, and that side here, that black is pretty much dry, but as you can see, it's not letting me cover it too much, so there's still some wet there. Dry brushing around it, like getting kind of a glow. I'm gonna kind of go over this. I want it to sort of look like part of it's in shadow, but the glow is sort of halfway shining through. I think I need a little bit more of this here. Whoops, that was a little bit more than I wanted. Notice how my brush is kind of starting to splay a little bit, which I'm taking advantage of that. So when I'm doing this, that's why I'm getting this kind of separated stroke. And every brush will do it a little different. The black is still wet enough that I'm picking up that black, but you can see I'm getting some faint streaks. Now what I'm doing here is I felt these two were too close in size, which compositionally I think made it less interesting. So I'm kind of trying to work this in so that it will be a little bit smaller, and also so that the black will pick up a little bit of green. This is kind of a little bit of a back and forth, darker than lighter, darker to lighter, blending until you kind of get the blend that you want. That kind of gradual. Okay, now one of the things that's left to do is to add a little bit more shadow on the flowers. I want to add a little bit of cool. This is pretty warm, and adding just a little bit of cool will kind of make things pop. Because it'll give you more contrast. This is fairly cool up in here, but especially compared to this red, and you've got some nice complementary red and green going on here, but we'll add a little bit of sky blue, which this particular sky blue comes out pretty lavender, which will give a nice contrast with this yellow. I'm going to put it on fairly thick so it stands out. It'll probably dry a little less so. I didn't mix any water with this. Actually, I'm putting more than I did in the original painting that I showed at the beginning here. That was kind of my trial painting. The thing with this color is you need to make sure that you don't mix it too much. It should sit on top, and it should be with a color that's really going to make it contrast. The nice thing about this, using this as a shadow like this, is even though it's a cool color, it still implies heat. And let's add a little bit of cool, just sort of was too wet up there, and not going to be as much contrast up here because of the colors and because this is cooler overall, but I'm going to add just a little bit anyway. Yeah, if you're hesitant to kind of try something like this, go ahead and do it. Let it, if you don't like it, let it dry and paint over it. Still feel this is too large, but I'm starting to fuss now, so I'm gonna go ahead and bring this down a little, add back a little bit of, I think I'll add a little white. What I'm doing now, just a damp brush, and keep cleaning it off because you pick up the color. What I'm doing is bringing this yellow out, and as I do that, it blends in the green, which means my brush picks up that green. So I am cleaning it off so I can do that, and I'm actually adding enough water. I'm doing this more like a watercolor. I'm letting it run in there and blend, and I'm probably going to get a bloom or a blossom. You've probably heard both terms, and that's okay. I can always work it out if I don't like it, but it will actually lend itself to what we're doing here with this light, because I just don't like the way it's blending in. I don't know if you can tell, there's quite a bit of water there compared to what we've been using. And I take the side of the brush and I plant it about halfway in the color, and I stroke it out just very lightly. I'm hardly putting any pressure on this brush at all. It's just barely touching the surface of the paper and drawing it out. I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. I'm still not totally happy with the size of these and how bright they are, but I'm going at this point to stop and just let it dry, and I'll see how everything looks, and I'll probably even scan it in to see how it looks, and then decide if I want to come back at this point. This is kind of how you tell that you're fussing. It's because you go one way, no, that's not right. You go the other way, no, that's not right. Something in your head, you're looking for something that just isn't happening and probably isn't even necessary. So that's when you should quit. That's one of the hardest lessons to learn, and I don't always listen to myself. Like I say, the nice thing with gouache is I could paint this entire thing over if I wanted to. Hopefully you've been able to follow me well enough to do this on your own. I do have the written tutorial out on Gouache. If you're watching this on YouTube, the link is down below, and that goes into a little bit more detail in a different way, gives you more time to look at things. So if you're just not getting it with this video, but you really want to give this a try, then I strongly suggest that you go to the Gouache review. Okay, after letting it dry and scanning it and talking to my husband, I decided I was going to leave this as it was. This was the painting that I initially did, and this is what I did while making the video. The one on the video is much brighter and much lighter, and overall I like it better, I think, than the first one. If you wish to continue and make it more like the one on the left, I'd add more black to the green areas. I would take some yellow or yellowish green and get rid of the white in here. Just keep making it a little darker and make the areas around it darker. A little bit more of the blue added down in here, and you'll get something more like this. Maybe add a little bit more red. So it's really just kind of what you like. You've got your choice.